Kagurabachi Chapter 89 is here, and we got this gorgeous color cover from Hokuzono, so let's get straight into it. Rain without clouds, evildoers are doomed. Hail in the summer, evildoers will perish. Thunder without black clouds, the sound of evildoers meeting their demise. All of these sayings about the weather resulted from one ferocious youth's hair-raising feats. At the time of the war, he was 20 years old, and in his 20s, he was hailed far and wide as a swordsman on par with Samura, former contracted bearer of Cloud Gouger, Ibuki Misaka. We then cut, and the narrator says, 3 years prior, at the time of Kunishige Rokuhira's assassination, Misaka was ambushed at home. And we see Misaka like sitting in a hot spring as Samurai Hishaku plops down in front of him. The narrator continues, the assassin came alone. At the end of the duel, the hero Misaka was left dead. We then cut back to the present with Azumi, who is standing over the samurai Hishaku, and he's remembering that he was there on the day of Rokuhira's assassination. He thinks to himself, this is the same armored assassin. But he reaches down to touch this body, and he says, but this is some kind of sorcery-controlled puppet. The real assassin is elsewhere. We then cut to outside of a Japanese smoke shop where we see Samurai Hishaku like bent over the counter, hands in his face. And there's an old grandma working the shop, not a Shiba, as much as I wish there would have been. But he's sitting there and he's like, gosh, this executioner is tough. Can't just handle him with a puppet. And we see another guy walk up to the smoke shop and he says, give me some cigs, Granny, and an assignment. And the granny says, the Seunkai gang is looking for personal security. And he says, can I also get a lighter too? And Samurai Hishaku says, oh, I got you. And the guy says, oh, thanks. But before he can even finish, Samurai Hishaku draws his sword and slices off the end of the cigarette so quickly that it lights from the friction. And he's taken aback by this. And he goes, did you just draw your katana just now? And Samurai Hishaku says, nah. And the guy goes, how did you light it then? And he goes, good question. We then finally see Samurai Hishaku's face for the first time, and Hokuzono is calling me ugly in 2 separate languages at once. And to top it off, this man winks at the guy on top of it, and he's like, what the? But then he sees the Hishaku tattoo on his hand, so he just turns and walks away. But as he does, he says, that's not nice. You did draw your katana. And Samurai says, oh, you did see me. And then the grandma says, so you lit it with friction? Is that even possible? And Samurai says, yeah, if you manipulate spirit energy skillfully enough, you can achieve ultra hot temperatures with mere friction. And the grandma says, huh, impressive and bizarre. And then the samurai's phone rings and he says, hello? And it's Hishaku on the other end of the phone. And he says, Hokuto, what are you doing? And he says, the armor suit just lost to Azumi. I reckon I bought us some time though. And Hishaku says, right, well, what are you waiting for? It's your turn. And Samurai says, yeah, sure, on my way. And Hishaku says, you sound unenthusiastic. Don't let me down. Your sorcery's great, but your real strength is what's behind it. Your swordsmanship. 3 years ago, your sorcery assisted us, but you defeated Misaka one-on-one. And Samurai says, enough. How many times do I have to say it? The Misaka I fought was no longer a master swordsman. It was 15 years after the war. He'd lost his fangs long ago. Do you know how aggravating it is to be praised for defeating that Misaka? And Hishaku says, sorry. And Samurai says, do you know how unsatisfying it was after all of those years of calibration and I never got to go all out? Since that day, I've been starved for a real duel. And Hishaku says, and that's why you're not motivated? And Samurai says, there's nobody interesting at headquarters. And Hishaku says, well, what about Shirakai's grandchild? And Samurai says, what, that little girl? And then Hishaku says, and Misaka's, but then another phone starts ringing. And Hishaku goes, and Samurai says, what's wrong? And Hishaku says, great news for you, anyway. Iruha's alive. And Samurai instantly lights up. And he goes, whoa, 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 what? Where? And Hishaku says, he's battling Yura and the guys inside HQ. You better hurry. And we see his eyes just bug out as he thinks over and over, Iruha, Iruha, Iruha. And then he turns to the grandma, blows her a kiss, and says, See you, sweetheart. And she goes, oh, stop. We then cut to the Kamunabi headquarters underground level 3 training room, where we see this character for the first time, who's got headphones on, is blasting music, and is training as these pieces of wood are launched out towards him like from a tennis ball machine, and he slices them instantly as soon as they are. It's a really cool shot. And as we see him just aura farming there, he thinks to himself, my big brother and I were born 2 years apart. And then we get like this quick flashback where we see Misaka and this character both sitting there in front of a banner that says the Misaka brothers. The narration continues. It says, in our hometown, we were undefeated. My big brother would smash the guy on the right, and I'd destroy the guy on the left. Together, we were unbeatable. And they're each wearing a jacket, and one of their jackets says no earthly rivals, and the other one says Supreme Team. It's cold as hell. The narration then continues and says, we were gifted sword fighters. When the Seitei War began, we headed to Tokyo. And before long, my big brother was selected to wield the Cloud Gouger enchanted blade. Together, we were invincible. I went to the battlefield too, but when they chose the bearers of the enchanted blades, and then we cut to see a young Aruha who said, Aruha, you're the right man for this sword. Kunishige says that. And the narration continues. It says, it was the final sword, apart from the Sanuchi. The guy who was chosen for Kumiyori was a newbie of the White Purity lineage. He was only 17 at the time, 1 year younger than me. My brother said, that's how it goes. In this world, the slightest weakness can spell defeat. And we see this guy just like grimacing at not being chosen. And he continues, so we went our separate ways. After the war, my brother completely lost his will to fight. And 3 years ago, the Hishaku killed my brother. He had become weak, so he was defeated. That's how it goes. I'm not like my brother. It's in the 18 years since the war, I've never let my focus on the sword waver. And now, and we see this other guy walk into the training room with him who's wearing goggles, and he says, Natsuki! And Natsuki turns and says, huh? And the guy says, didn't you hear the broadcast? It's an emergency. And he goes, what's up? Because he had the headphones on, he didn't hear. And the goggles guy says, invaders in the West Wing level 5. Hishaku. We then cut to him thinking back to the memory of discovering his brother's dead body. Like he was the one that found Misaka. And then he cuts back to reality and the goggles guy says, you ready? And he says, beyond ready. I've had a long warm-up. And we get this guy's title card, Natsuki Misaka, Kamunabi Togo Squad Commander. And that's where the chapter ends. All right, this was an awesome chapter. We got to find out a lot. And what a cold way to start it, by just dropping all of those sayings that developed because of Misaka's presence in the war about the weather. And we got a similar one about Samura and the crows in an earlier chapter. And I just wonder if all of the blade wielders have like these really cool sayings that developed around them. We'll have to see. But yeah, really cool learning about him. And we find out that the samurai Hishaku guy is not dead. Azumi just killed his puppet, and it is his puppet that was present at Kunishige's death because the real samurai went to take him out, and it's something he trained for. He's been looking for an amazing sword duel, very much reminding me of Kuguri in the way that Samurai Hishaku like craves a good challenge. But he was let down because Misaka was not the same man after the war, probably wrestling with all of the demons that we know, Samura has been and Kunishige has been, like par for the course, right? So probably means Misaka was like a good guy at his heart. So Samurai Hishaku didn't get the duel he wanted, and now he is stoked because he has a chance to test himself against Aruha. But little does he know, little bro is coming after him with all of the smoke. So I'm interested to see like how these encounters go down. Like, I'm worried for this guy, but he's so cool, so I don't want him to die yet, especially because he's part of Shiba's squad. Let's go. He just keeps taking W's. And this man has had all the motivation in the world because he felt like he was shunned by not being chosen for an enchanted blade, and he has been training diligently ever since. So Samurai Hishaku might get his fulfillment from younger Misaka and not Aruha. But again, I'm just curious to see how all of those pieces fall into place. And it was really cool to get a brief glimpse at the selection process for the enchanted blades, because we saw that shot of a young Aruha being selected by Kunishige in a room full of potential sword bearers, right, including Misaka's younger brother. So I'm curious just like what exactly that application process looked like. And it does seem that Kunishige had the final say, so I'm imagining it's equal parts like skill with the sword, but also what type of person you are, right? So I wonder if we'll get any more kind of flashbacks to that time and get to see like what they did to try and prove themselves to become blade wielders. But also, speaking of Aruha, I got to give a shout out to my guy Branwin, who sent me in a couple of questions about last week's, or not questions, but thoughts about last week's episode of Kagurabachi. And he says, I wonder how Yura knows what Aruha's sorcery is. Aruha's innate sorcery has been sealed for almost 20 years now, so it either have to be recorded somewhere or Yura knows what his abilities are from before Aruha got the contract. I also feel like there's more to the connection between Yura and the Sword Saint. From what was said shown this chapter, Yura's abilities are similar to the Sanuchi. The conspiracy side of me wants to think that Yura was made by the Sanuchi and isn't actually human. This would explain his knowledge of the malediction, his agelessness, and his desire to get to the Sanuchi. Also, if Itsuo Shirakai is seemingly such a great swordsman, I wonder why he wasn't chosen for an enchanted blade, especially considering 2 of his students were chosen. And also, how strong is the Sword Saint if you have people like Shirakai, who trained people like Aruha and Samura, for all of them to pale in comparison? But yeah, this is interesting. And first of all, for Yura knowing Aruha's sorcery, that doesn't really ping as something strange to me per se. There could be a couple of explanations for it, but I do think it could just be as simple as people know a lot about the blade wielders, right? They've got to be like mega celebrities in this kind of verse in that way, right? Probably taught about in the history books. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's just like a fun fact that people might know about all of them, and or at the very least would be easily attainable information, and probably not something that was like kept secretive. But I mean, what do I know, right? But then as far as the connection between Yura and the Sword Saint, I'm sure you guys have seen now my video where we talked about that for like 20 minutes, and I could easily see like him not being human, him being some sort of puppet or something like that. But I'm kind of torn. But especially from the previous chapter where Aruha specifically reacted to Yura's eyes, like there's absolutely some sort of connection there. And then as for why Itsuo wasn't chosen, that's a good question. Maybe he was too old, or maybe back to something we talked about earlier, Kunishige didn't think he was a good person. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. But also a reminder, we are on break week next week, so there's going to be no new chapter of Kagurabachi. So it's all the more reason for you to join the Discord and come hang out with us and talk Kagurabachi there. But as always, y'all, thank you so much for watching.